Three things must become legal before the end of the world, claimed the colorful boxing personality Tyson Fury: homosexuality, pedophilia, and abortion. To this admission, the reporter laughed, responding, "Abortion isn't in the Bible." Tyson averted by saying, "Well, that's what you think," and then quickly changed the subject. Even theologically educated Christians mistakenly believe the Bible nowhere explicitly mentions abortion, so they are forced to adopt the weaker position. Abortion is not in the Bible, but the sanctity of life is. This weaker position is not what life-honoring Christians would prefer, but it's the route they have had to take since they think abortion isn't criticized in Scripture. In this video, I want to show you the practice of abortion is explicitly mentioned in the Bible, that it is portrayed in a very negative light, and I want you to see why so many Christians have failed to detect it to this point. You may think that you understand the story of the Exodus, that the children of Israel became too many and too powerful, and so Pharaoh placed them in slavery and demanded that their male children be cast into the Nile River. But it is not quite this simple. Let's read the story more carefully. When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, now we want to highlight this word birth stool, because as we're going to see, this is where the problem resides. Hebrew scholars do not know what to do with this word, and so they take a guess at it and translate it as birth stool. We're going to come back to this. If it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this, and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." This is where we need to pause and ask the question, why did the midwives think that this is an acceptable excuse? If Pharaoh commanded that they kill live children, how come they come to Pharaoh and say, "We could not terminate the children because by the time we get there, they are already born"? Well, if the command is to terminate live children, then this is not an acceptable excuse. But as we'll see, Pharaoh gives a second decree. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." So Pharaoh gives a decree that the male children should be done away with. The midwives come to Pharaoh and say, "We could not do away with the male children because they were already born." Pharaoh accepts this excuse and then issues a second decree stating that we are going to now do away with live children. The only way to make sense of this is if the midwives were supposed to go and perform an abortion, but the children are born before they get there, and so Pharaoh has to issue a second decree moving on from abortion to terminating live children. As I stated, the reason we miss this is because our English versions have the midwives terminating the male children upon the birth stool, but the Hebrew word does not contain an allusion to birth or even to a stool. The Hebrew word is ovum. It occurs in only one other place in the Old Testament, in Jeremiah 18:3. There the prophet says, "I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, making something on the wheel." In Jeremiah, ovum refers to a potter's wheel. Now you can see why translators struggle in Exodus. Pregnant Hebrew women surely wouldn't spend their time on a potter's wheel, so they reason this must refer to a birth stool at the time of labor. But the Hebrew text is, in fact, referring to a potter's wheel. We just have to understand something about how Egyptian mythology works and how Egyptians thought about pregnancy. At the time of Moses, Egyptians worshipped the creator god Khnum. Khnum was a ram-headed deity and was believed to be the source of the Nile River, a prominent landmark in the Exodus story. The Egyptians depicted him as creating human beings within the womb on a potter's wheel. Upon his will, every person's gender, as well as other physical and psychological attributes, were determined by Khnum. When Pharaoh tells the midwives to terminate the male children upon the will, he is not referring to termination upon a birthing stool. Rather, he is requiring termination during the period of pregnancy, when Khnum would determine a child's gender on his potter's will. When the midwives tell Pharaoh the children are already born by time they arrive, Pharaoh then ceases his program of state-sponsored abortion and switches to infanticide via the Nile River. Notice that both of Pharaoh's decrees to terminate Hebrew boys have to do with the domain of Khnum. The first involves aborting children within the womb, and the second involves drowning them in the Nile River. This serves as a foil for what is coming, when Yahweh will have his victory over the gods of Egypt. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. Exodus 12:12. You might be wondering what type of prenatal examination the midwives were expected to perform to determine the gender of a child still in the womb. As it turns out, ancient Egyptian pregnancy tests were similar to modern pregnancy tests in that they involved the woman's urine. Egyptian women would urinate on wheat and barley seeds for a few days. If there was growth, the woman was determined to be pregnant. If it was the wheat that grew, it was a boy. If it was barley, it was a girl. Scientists actually tested this method in 1963 and found it to be accurate 70% of the time in determining if a woman was pregnant. Growth hormones in a pregnant woman's urine had an effect on the plant seeds. However, the test was not accurate in determining the gender of the child. The scientific ineffectiveness of this method has no bearing on the Exodus story, however, as the midwives were unwilling to perform their abortions in either case, since they, quote, feared God. In turn, God responds to the refusal to enact the abortions by giving them families of their own, a sign of divine blessing in the ancient world. It is well known that, like many ancient civilizations, the Egyptians practiced abortion. Biblical scholar Scott Morshauser, who brought the issue of abortion in Exodus to light in his article in the Journal of Biblical Literature, and upon whose research this video is based, reports that such a procedure would have been within the scope of ancient Egyptian knowledge and practice. Medical texts contain prognostic recipes for determining the sex of an unborn child, as well as prescriptions for ending a pregnancy through drafts and potions. But what is the big picture here? What are the theological implications of abortion in this story? To answer this, we must recognize the link between the Exodus and the creation of the world. In the beginning, God blessed Adam and Eve, telling them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. When humanity gets itself into trouble at the Tower of Babel, God chooses to move forward on his plan to bless humanity, but this time he won't do it through the whole human race. Instead, he confers creation's blessings on one family, Abraham's family, promising to multiply his offspring as the stars in the sky. But this promise, initially given to Adam and later channeled to Abraham, is brought to a grinding halt whenever we encounter Pharaoh. Pharaoh observes that God's intended blessings are taking effect. The people are multiplying and filling the land, as it states in Genesis. So Pharaoh becomes an agent of decreation, reversing the blessings of creation through the practice of state-sponsored abortion. God says, be fruitful. Pharaoh sends the midwives to perform abortions. God begins to create the earth by calling it out of the waters. Pharaoh reverses God's blessings by throwing the Hebrew children back into the water. In response, God sends a series of ironic punishments. Since Pharaoh seeks to reverse the blessings of creation, God reverses the Genesis story by undoing creation inside Egypt. The plagues are intended to be direct allusions to the creation event. And God said, let the waters swarm, sharats, with swarms of living creatures. The Nile shall swarm, sharats, with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed. The reason I highlight the word sharats is because it is rare. It was used when God made the world and when he remade it after the flood. But it's not used again until the plague of frogs. The swarms of creatures in Genesis were meant to be a good thing, but now they are turned into a curse for Egypt. And remember, God gave Adam rule over the animals. But in the plagues, God gives the animals dominion over the Egyptians, undoing the order of creation established in Genesis 1. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant, Eseb, yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth. Stretch out your hand toward heaven, so that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, on man and beast, and every plant Eseb of the field. Again, before the plague of hail, the word Eseb was only used at the creation event and when God remade the world after the flood. The word's placement here is to communicate that God is using the hailstorm to unmake the plant creation. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt. A reintroduction of darkness brings creation back to its dark beginnings before God announced, "Let there be light." Interestingly, this creation reversal does not affect the Israelites in the land of Goshen. For them it is said, "There was light," which is most certainly a throwback to the first day of creation when God said, "Let there be light." And finally, Pharaoh, the biblical abortionist, the agent of infanticide. Before God made the land and its forms of life, he separated the waters from the waters. For Pharaoh, this process is reversed. When he enters the Red Sea, the waters have already been divided. Then they are brought back together upon his head. But the children of Israel emerge from the waters like a new creation, like the book of Genesis, all over again. So what is the place of abortion in the Exodus? Pharaoh reversed God's creation blessings by abortion and infanticide. God responds to these crimes by reversing creation in Egypt, destroying the country, and using the Red Sea to sweep Pharaoh back into the watery abyss of the primeval world. I want to be clear about something. I did not make this video to tip my hat to civil religion, that mixture of politics and religion so integrated that you can no longer tell the two apart. Being an American does not make you a Christian. Supporting the troops does not make you a Christian. Voting Republican does not make you a Christian. As Christians, we proclaim a kingdom that is not of this world. And conservative Christians in the United States who fail to distinguish their Christian identity from their political identity fall into many regretful errors. These are those who will rant for hours on end against abortion and sexual sin, and then turn a blind eye to societal sins like white-collar crime, the rule of the rich, and systemic racism. Make no mistake, I am not waving the banner of conservative American politics. Nevertheless, I do realize that just because Christians belong to a different kind of kingdom doesn't mean we can turn a blind eye to evil practices precipitated by the political realities of this world, including abortion. This is why I thought it was important to show that the Bible does mention abortion, and it does not depict it as being a good thing.